Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Alexandrova Stefanova. Now we are going to hear Rashid Suleiman from the Agriculture Extension in South Asia Network, GFRAS, on how to encourage the adoption of agroecology in rural advisory services. The floor is yours.
Okay. I am trying to share. Do you have the permission to share it? Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Let me put it in there. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be a part of the global forum for our rural advisory services and the annual meetings, which we have been doing it for the last, maybe this is the 12th year. And thanks to the organizers, including GFRAS and the CISN for inviting me to this meeting. My presentation focuses on how do you to encourage the adoption of agroecology within rural advisory services. That is where I would like to focus my presentation on. And I am making these four main arguments in my presentation. One is there is a growing list of approaches to transform agriculture and food systems, including agroecology, because it's becoming a major or maybe it's a major approach which has been gaining a lot of attention. And many of these approaches offer alternatives to chemical intensive single crop farming and the industrial farming, which has led to a lot of negative environmental effects. So that is number one. Though agroecology and other approaches are very promising, there are several barriers that constrain it from being mainstreamed. These barriers exist within RAS as well as within the farming community. So there are two types of barriers. Third is advisory services. Here we are talking about a pluralistic advisory services, which comprises organizations, agencies from the public sector, private sector, producer organizations, civil society, the NGOs. In general, they are not very much familiar with many of these alternative sustainable, in promoting many of these alternative approaches which are more sustainable. And they have very limited capacities as of now, currently, to promote agroecology. This is very evident in the public sector, whereas some of the NGOs, civil society organizations, and producer organizations are rapidly catching up on this. And we need to have significant transitions within the RAS if we are serious about promoting agroecology. So I think within RAS, we need to make significant transitions, and which I will be discussing about that in my brief presentation. So coming to this whole growing list of approaches, because there are so many approaches which have been tried by farmers and the civil society organizations in different regions of the world. People talk about organic agriculture, agroecology, climate smart agriculture, sustainable agricultural intensification, permaculture, and many of them address the issue of sustainability, including its three dimensions: economic, social, and the environmental. And they also provide a diverse set of approaches to support farmers. And many of these practitioners and the research have also proved that they will be able to support or protect the ecosystems. And there is an increasing realization, which is also articulated in several global reports, as well as in the UNFSS, in the discussions, that business as usual is no longer an option. So we need to, if we wanted to really transform agricultural and food systems, we need to embrace several new approaches. And as I said before, agroecology is one of the most promising and widely discussed option currently. So now, what is agroecology currently? People believe that it is a scientific discipline, it is an agricultural practice, and it is also a kind of a social movement. We have seen that agroecology is really transformed from, initially it was a kind of, we have the evidence from descriptive studies from plot level. Now we consider agroecology as more of a interdisciplinary study of food systems. So this is where it has evolved. And before preparing this presentation, I also did a Google Scholar in the search on the Google Scholar to find out how many books or journal articles are having the title of agroecology in its title. And I could locate about 3,900 articles which has agroecology in their title. I also looked into whether we have articles related to agroecology and extension or advisory services, where I could find about 19 articles which are having agroecology and extension mentioned in the title. So there's a lot in terms of it has evolved significantly. Another is as an agricultural practice also, agroecology has evolved from initially it was more about maybe learning from the traditional practices or maybe from the farmers practicing traditional agriculture, maybe from the indigenous agricultural kind of a knowledge. Now which has emerged as an alternate paradigm challenging the different principles or maybe the assumptions of conventional agriculture. And it's also a kind of a social movement because now the agroecology has become a movement led mainly by the civil society and the farmer organizations, and which offers a kind of an alternative. It has become an alternative to the conventional, the chemical intensive or the input intensive agriculture. So agroecology currently offers a set of principles for agroecological and agricultural as well as ecological management of agri-food systems. So I think the point is it has evolved a lot, and so there is a lot of scope for applying ecology. But at the farm level, it often people represent it as a set of practices, including agroforestry, IPM, organic and biofertilizers, conservation tillage, a number of conserving agri-biodiversity. So the people look at it from in terms of a practice at the farm level, a wide range of practices which are knowledge intensive as well as management intensive. So they look at these are the kind of a practices which is a combination of different practices at the farm level. And FAO, I think Nevena mentioned about the 10 principles of agroecology, the FAO document. And for organizations like FAO, for them, it is a bottom-up empowering process, helping to deliver contextualized solutions to local problems. So it's an approach to many of these agencies. And there is a lot of evidence to prove that this addresses the 3 dimensions of sustainability: the ecological, economic, environmental, and the social dimensions of agriculture, and especially in terms of sustainable development. So coming to the issue of let me look at what are the barriers to mainstream agroecology, because we have been talking about agroecology is something which is really very interesting. A lot of it has evolved, but the problem, one of the main barrier is because it involves a lot. It's a knowledge and management intensive, because it depends on developing local solutions, testing new knowledge in the farmer's field. So it needs a lot of horizontal learning and networking among the farmers, and it needs a kind of a community action. So it needs to be supported much more heavily than promoting a green revolution type of an agriculture. And when it comes to the contributions of advisory services, actually advisory services do not have a very great record on promoting sustainable agricultural practices. One is, in many cases, if you look at the public sector, which is a dominant in many of the developing countries, their mandate is always about increasing food production, increasing food productivity. I think even ideas like nutrition or agroecology, climate smart, these are all only coming out very, very slowly into the kind of a mandate. And in many countries, the mandate remains almost the same. And I think the recent study, I think the Landini, this 2021 paper, which is a study which is trying to, to look at the finding out from the extension agents and advisors how much they value agroecology. And the study found that even half of the respondents, it was done in several countries, even half of the respondents, they believe that agroecological approaches are important. They are important. They are providing a lot of value. But the organizations in which they are employed, they don't have taken any position on these approaches. So there is no explicit position. So the organizations are less interested, or they don't have a position, whereas most of the advisors believe that no, this is something which is an interesting part. Another is the issue of policies and market signals, because the policies, many of the policies try to favor, especially the subsidies in agriculture. Many of them promote, at least try to keep on promoting the unsustainable or more unsustainable practices, and they can keep the cost of production through unsustainable agricultural practices low, then there is private, the commercial interest of the private sector sometimes do not favor, and sometimes procurement policies, subsidies policies, many of them do not favor, because we have not developed the proper financial instruments and policy signals that can favor agroecology. The fourth one is about the insecure land tenure, which discourages many of the small farmers who are tenant farmers or who are sharecroppers from making long-term investments in their land. For instance, maybe promoting agroecology, or maybe promoting the long-term sustainability of the soil. And the last one which I wanted to point out is this: there is a kind of a lack of give and take within these kind of. There are two different kind of schools of thought. One is thinking about the agroecological practices are the only way to go about, and they consider it as an alternative. And sometimes they say no, it's an opposed. It is completely opposed to the conventional farming, and this is not very helpful, because through this process we are narrowing the scope of promoting agroecological principles, because there's agroecology also offer, there are several elements which also offer possibilities for making incremental improvements in the conventional farming. Though there is a lot of scope for transformative changes in the agri-food system. So I think unless we have something called as a constructive complementarities being discussed between these two different schools of thought, so the scaling up agroecology become a challenge. So coming to the next point in terms of how do we promote this within RAS and agroecology. So what are the kind of challenges exclusively when it comes to rural advisory services? As I said before, both public and private sector have very poor track record in promoting sustainable agricultural practices. Public sector RAS in many countries faces a number of challenges because they have very limited manpower. There's a declining number of field extension personnel, lack operational funding. So they also lack sometimes adaptive research support. So they face a number of challenges. Private sector has their own kind of commercial interests. So there's a lot of changes that are happening on that front. But I think still they are not in the kind of the great champions for promoting agroecology. But I think there are the three main aspects are, one is if you look at the history of extension, I think extension has been designed and promoted mainly to inform, educate farmers on knowledge developed by the formal research. And many of our extension agents, they don't promote unless the new knowledge, unless it is ratified by the National Agricultural Research System or the state agricultural university. This kind of a very linear transfer of technology model, which is the usual model of research extension kind of a farmer, and where they believe that the formal research is the only source of knowledge to be transferred. And unfortunately, much of the new knowledge that is generated in the agroecology is not within the public sector. It is outside the public sector. So there is an issue in terms of the kind of the mandate and the mental map of how extension is basically placed in the agricultural development space. Second is the lack of context-specific problem-solving adaptive research. We heard about, I think Nivena also mentioned about the co-creation, the importance of having a co-creation, have the knowledge being tested, evaluated at the farmers' field. Farmers are being empowered to ask or formulate research questions and try to find solutions. Co-creation has not yet been mainstreamed within the research or maybe in extension in many countries. And third issue is the lack of context-specific, is about the capacities, especially in terms of promote learning. Because advisory services are mostly designed to provide solutions to farmers' problems. So they are pre-designed kind of solutions to farmers. Problem solving, very less problem solving, because the whole approach is about demonstrating, it is about training farmers on technologies on how to solve their kind of problems. And there is very little interactions among the multiple stakeholders, because even if agroecology or even other matter, unless you have a partnership with the research policy, service sector, the marketing, I think ideas in terms of promoting new technologies, promoting new approaches that won't go very much further. So there is a kind of a problem. And there is also an issue of lower investments in R&D investments in agroecology and many other sustainable intensification practices. I think recent studies from the Commission on Sustainable Agriculture Intensification, COSI, and some of the studies which have been conducted by the FEEBLE, they all indicate that not more than 10 to 20% of the total R4D, research for development investments, are happening in the agroecology space. Much of it is still in the 80% or more is in terms of conventional input intensive agriculture. So I think funding is another issue which has also to be dealt with. So I think these are some of the very specific challenges within RAS and agroecology. And coming to the transition, so I think if we really wanted to really make transformations within the RAS to promote agroecology, we need to move from, one is this objective of only from increasing productivity to we need to look into multiple objectives: resilience, recycling, ecosystem functions, better quality of water, biodiversity. We need to embrace new objectives. We need to look for not merely for short-term impact at the farm level. We need to think about how can we making incremental improvements over the long term. Knowledge from merely in thinking in terms of transferring from a centrally produced expert knowledge to, we need to move towards facilitating participatory experimentation, use of approaches like at farmer field schools, blending farmer knowledge with expert knowledge. Then the whole, and who are the knowledge workers in this area? There's a limit to how many permanent staff can be recruited for advisory services. And unless we build on the capacities of, or maybe we need to develop the capacities, identify and develop capacities of community resource persons who are accountable to the communities, we cannot achieve more farmer to farmer extension, or we can think about doing more participatory action research. Similarly, the content, advisory services have been mostly focusing on the individual farmers, but we need to now see, we need to mobilize farmers and help them in terms of integrating a wide range of services and knowledge they can provide through the value chains. Financing is an issue because we need to have more blended financing, community also sharing a contribution. Some of this is already happening. Some of this is happening in places where the communities have pooled their resources, and they are partly supporting the cost of the services of a facilitator who will be liaising and trying to support farmers with promoting agroecology. And another is, we also heard a lot about the digitization today. I think when we look at the agroecological practices, this is not about a supply-driven passing on weather information or the price information or technology through SMS, short message services, through mobile phones. Here we are now talking about how can we empower the farmers groups in terms of developing locally relevant data. For instance, developing maybe what is the pest dynamics, what are the type of pests, communities try to generate data. So we need to empower them in terms of using ICTs to generate data, pool them, help them analyze it, link it with the experts who can make more sense of these kind of things. So the point is, agroecology is not something which can be simply transferred from one farmer, transferred from research to extension. We need to have groups, we need to have a mechanism of farmer networks and mechanisms for participatory social learning. Agroecology is not something which you can simply add on to the job chart of an agent, because it is much more, it has to be integrated into the values, ethics, as well as into the organizational mandate and organizational capacity. So I think this is the kind of a transition which are needed in advisory services to support agroecology. So in terms of what are the ways forward, so what are the in terms of mainstreaming, especially agroecology within the advisory services, because we all believe that advisory services are very critical to help to support farmers to embrace, adopt new technologies, embrace new approaches, and gain farmers to enhance their income. There's a lot of things happening, especially at the global level, especially if I look at the Transformative Partnership Platform, the TPP platform on agroecology. which has been doing several discussions even at the policy level on policies. What are the kind of policies for agroecology? Because it's not merely a technological issue. Second is the FAO's Agroecology Knowledge Hub. There is a lot of resources and experience shared through the Agroecology Knowledge Hub. There are experiences to learn from countries like Brazil, and I think there is a presentation from Ricardo, I think tomorrow, which talks about how the Brazil changed its laws and policies to promote agroecology. There have been challenges, I think, but there's a 2-decade history of how do we promote agroecology. But I think it's also happening in other countries, like we have been seeing it in Laos, in the LURAS project in the coffee sector. We are seeing it in India, in the state of Andhra Pradesh. We have been trying to promote this, what is called as the zero budget natural farming, which is a type of, it's an agroecological kind of an approach. There have been efforts which are happening there are also in many other countries also. And another major one is about this La Vaya Campesina. I think many of people know that it's one of the world's largest social movement. I think promoting this campesino approach, of the CAC approach, which is focusing on the farmer to farmer movement, and which has set up several regional agroecology training centers in Latin America and beyond, in India, Indonesia, and we have seen it in Zimbabwe. So I think there's a lot which we need to learn from many of these experiments which are currently happening. I'm trying to move my slide. I think it stopped, I think, somehow. And I think probably I have only two more slide. Oh, I think it'll be good to the. Okay, so I think probably this is the last two slides which I have. Another is, if you wanted to encourage agroecology, we need to generate definitely more evidence. The point is, we need to have the conventional approaches in terms of measuring yield, or maybe measuring the income from a farmer from a single crop is not the way to assess the performance of agroecology, because we need to measure the performance of agroecology on a number of other factors: resilience, diversity, synergy, adaptation, mitigation. So I think there's a lot many aspects on which we need to measure its kind of a performance. And we also need to have evidence in terms of which are the type of farmers who are more likely to embrace agroecology, what approaches can work best. So I think there's a lot of gaps in terms of our information, though a lot of it is already coming. And we need to use some of these tools like the TAPE, the tool for agroecology performance evaluation, that tries to help measure the different dimensions of sustainability. So I think there's also a need to generate more evidence from this kind of a part. And so I think this is my final slide in terms of, okay, what does it mean for networks, the GFRAS, especially at the global, at the regional, as well as at the country fora level. I think we need to do a lot more advocacy work in this area in terms of maybe developing position papers, participate in these global, regional, national initiatives, especially in the TPP initiatives, the Agroecology Hub. And we also need to review the review of mandates and support development of policies. This is something at the national level. This is something the country for us, the GFRAS country for us, can play a large role in doing some of these kind of things. We also need to generate lessons. There's a lot of lessons which are already are there, but probably we need to have maybe a call for good practice notes, so practitioners share what they have learned from these. We can do a synthesis in terms of deriving maybe what are the kind of principles in terms of successful scaling up of agroecology. And another is in terms of promote knowledge exchange among EAS providers, like organizing workshops. And GFRAS, I think a few months back, we organized one workshop in terms of understanding the role of advisory services and especially the role of advisory services in promoting agroecology. So we need to organize more workshops, webinars, and regional consultations. And I think I will stop here, because we would have another round of more detailed discussions on this topic tomorrow, I think at the same time. I think, and I will leaving few references at the end, but I think this is for you for those people who would like to know more. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suleiman. After the keynote speeches, we are going to have a facilitated discussion The moderator of this discussion will be Dragana Tar from CIDEV. The floor is yours, Dragana.
Good afternoon to everyone.